Yeah,
Bye.
great.
There you go.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. One of the things Ellen didn't tell you is that when we cooked for People's Music Network, people had to barter. So Ellen usually bartered by giving me a foot massage at the end of the 12-hour day on my feet so that I could go back to do another 12-hour day the next day to cook for folks. So anyway, yeah, a couple of things. I'm really, as Ellen said, I lived, actually, when I lived in Voluntown, I lived at what was then called the New England Community for Nonviolent Action, which was a direct outgrowth of the Committee for Nonviolent Action, which was the direct outgrowth of the Nonviolent Action. If anybody has read Albert Bigelow's book, The Voyage of the Golden Rule, he talks about the NBA in there a lot, and that's basically, and when throughout my talk, I'll talk a little bit more about that, because I think that there are a lot of organizations that were involved back in the early days that have then kind of morphed and changed names, but are still involved in some way, particularly focusing on opposition to nuclear weapons. And I think that one of the things that I want to do tonight is kind of help people give some more of that context, because I think there's a lot of that, as Ellen said, as a nonviolence trainer, for me, it's important to really understand some of the strategy behind this, some of the tactical decisions that were made, not just around the Golden Rule going out, but some of the other kinds of decisions that had to be made, and that we always have to do, I think, when we're involved in campaigns, we're involved in trying to make social change. I would like to share my screen. Can I do that, Ellen? If you can let me do that. Okay, I'll do that in a minute. Let me just a little bit, yeah, a little bit more of a prep here. And again, I think that I want to focus.
Sorry, I was muted, so I did. You can share. I
can share. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Well, if I can do that. All right. Is that working for folks? Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to kind of thank people for inviting me here. I think I've had a lot of conversation with Jim, and I see Daz is on, and Daz and I have done a lot of work around kind of the history of the Peace Trust, and kind of digging down into some of the things. Also, as War Resisters League person, kind of been somebody holding that history, and as somebody who is of my age, I'm 74, and involved so long, I've been able to meet a number of the people who were involved and worked with a number of them, and particularly George Willoughby and Jim Peck and some of the other people who were then part of the Nonviolent Action Group. But I think that I'm hoping what I can offer is an opportunity for us to think about kind of strategically how we look at any work that we're doing against nuclear weapons, against this policy of mutually assured destruction, and particularly now with the Golden Rule out there at a time when there's this opportunity to focus on its illegality due to the treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I think it's a really good time to kind of look at all of these big issues. So I want to go back a little in history and talk about the Golden Rule in the context of the Ban the Bomb movement, because that's exactly what was kind of happening in the 1950s, right? So we know one of the things, hopefully people here, I'm assuming people here have a little history of the Golden Rule and of Albert Bigelow's story, that many people, including Bigelow, were deeply changed by the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that the times following that became very difficult, particularly for the pacifists who had been opposing the weapons because of McCarthyism, because of the anti-communist movement sweeping the nation, because it was harder to be heard at that period of time with their messages. I think one of the things that's interesting, and I noticed this was included in the little 10-minute video on the website, was the role that women and mothers particularly played in the 1950s around atmospheric testing. Because they were aware of strontium-90, because they were aware that it was in the milk. I've met many, many people who were raised on powdered milk, because apparently it didn't hold, the strontium-90 did not hold in the powdered milk as much as it did in the fat of regular milk. So there were a lot of individuals who were aware at that time of nuclear weapons and who were against the atmospheric testing. But from my understanding, the first protests, the first series of protests in the kind of ban the bomb movement were against the civil defense drills that were happening in New York City. And they began in 1954. The drills did, but in 1955, a group of folks from the Catholic Worker, the War Resisters League, Peacemakers, and Fellowship of Reconciliation organized to refuse to do the duck and cover. And so basically they sat in City Hall Park. It was people like Dorothy Day and Eamon Hennessy, Ralph DeGia, Jim Peck. Some of these names just keep coming over and over again. Bayard Rustin, AJ Musty. And these folks were arrested for sitting in City Hall Park and refusing to go into a building's basement or into the subway system. And then they did that every year. And every year the crowds got so much bigger and so much bigger as they organized this. And that finally in 1962, the city of New York had to give up giving these drills because thousands and thousands of people were resisting going into these ridiculous duck and cover kinds of action. So that was a real sense of kind of an empowerment and an understanding that people were concerned, but people were not buying the propaganda. So then in 1957, and kind of that McCarthyism was waning, there were two key organizations that are key here to the story of the Golden Rule that were formed. So one is the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, which we all really knew as sane or know as sane, right? That was formed under the leadership of Larry Scott. Lawrence Scott was a Quaker activist, had been active in earlier civil rights movements work. Homer Jack, who was also on the Journey of Reconciliation in 1947. Norman Cousins, a number of folks who got together. Norman Cousins later would become kind of an unofficial ambassador between the Vatican, the Kremlin, and the White House around the test ban treaty. So this organization was basically structured to be an educational and membership organization. And it was an organization that brought together pacifists and non-pacifists. So the idea being that until then, it was mostly pacifists who were engaging in this work, but increasingly other people who were opposed to nuclear weapons, and even more people opposed to the atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. So SANE came together to kind of do that educational work. At the same time, and some of the same people, including Lawrence Scott, organized the Nonviolent Action Against Nuclear Weapons Committee, or the NVA, as it became known and is written about mostly in Bigelow's book in particular. And these folks were representative of major peace groups who did have a commitment to nonviolent action and mostly identified as pacifist. So that would have been the War Resisters League, Fellowship of Reconciliation, the Peacemakers, and some of the Quaker action groups. So you have Quaker groups in both American Friends Service Committee, and then a number of Quaker action groups that were, many of the ones that I'm aware of were centered around Philadelphia. George Willoughby being one of the people who was very active in that. And this is the group, as I said, that later became the Committee for Nonviolent Action. So, and I want to give a little, I'm going to show about 10 pictures. The pictures, a few are from Bigelow's book. This one came from The Power of the People. A few are from the book about the peace symbol. So I found a lot of really good resources that tell the Golden Rule story, and kind of in a context that I've been able to try to hopefully put together a little bigger way. So the very first protest that the NBA organized as they were talking about what to do. And actually the idea of having a boat out in the Pacific had already been sparked by the English, somebody in the UK also looking at having a boat out there, but there was no time to organize for that. So Al Bigelow and many others from the Nonviolent Action Group planned to do a protest at the Nevada test site when there was going to be an atmospheric test in August of 1957. And so that demonstration would have been the first really large national action that had been done, national nonviolent action that had been done since 1947, when there were demonstrations against the draft cards that were continuing after the war. So Bigelow and about 30 other activists, a lot of East Coast and West Coast folks who were active in nonviolent groups. And a number of these folks were people who resisted during World War II and had already spent time in jail. Some of them were people who were active in Congress of Racial Equality. So some of them already really were steeped in nonviolent action. And then others like Al Bigelow, this was really, while he had that commitment, it was still new to him in terms of engaging in these kinds of actions. So
Hey, Joanne,
yeah.
can you put your slideshow on so that it, put it on the slideshow so it fills the screen so people can see these things a little bigger? People want to actually read your
I'm not
flyers.
great at this. I'm not sure what I'm doing here.
Okay, try
Oh,
hitting.
I see. Yeah. I got you. Hey, oh, look.
Perfect. Thank you.
All I have to do is look. Is that better? Yeah. So this is the flyer that was put together at the Nevada test site's about 70 miles from Las Vegas. So you have to go in through Las Vegas. So they're kind of playing on that here. Don't gamble with nuclear weapons. So about 35 people went to this demonstration and vigiled as near as they could get to the gate. And then in groups of 2 or 3, including Bigelow, went to the gate, crossed over the line, and were arrested for trespassing. So this began to kind of make, they're also good at doing enough publicity that this got out there. And then this organization continued to particularly petition in Washington, including Bigelow doing a lot of this, with large banners and a focus to stop all tests, British, American, and Russian. So they were writing to the president, they were doing a lot of gathering of petitions and the like. And then they had vehicles like Liberation Magazine had just begun to be published. And so they had a way and a kind of an outlet of getting larger articles and pieces out. All right, now that I do this, though, I'm not sure how I get to the next one. I should have given this to Daz to do.
I think if you just click on it.
No, I've gotten one too many. That's okay. That's okay. I just click
it. Try hitting your back arrow, see if that works. Your cursor.
That's okay. It was just the cover of the book. We'll leave it in here.
Okay.
So thanks. So a couple of other pieces that pull this together. In April of 1958, Bayard Rustin, who was a member of Nonviolent Activists, was invited to go to England for the demonstrations there that they were doing in Aldermaston at the Atomic Weapons Research Facility that was there. These became very large, focused anti-nuclear demonstrations in England. And it was for those demonstrations, particularly in 1958, that the committee of 100 asked a man named Gerald Holstrom to create a symbol that would represent nuclear disarmament, and that is what we now know as the peace symbol. And so that book, the image I just missed, was the cover of a book that was written for the 50th anniversary. And this image of the Golden Rule is in that book. So they credit the Golden Rule in this book on the peace symbol as really kind of giving the peace symbol worldwide attention. That Bayard Rustin comes back to the US, shares it with the people in WRL and in the Nonviolent Action Group, and the Golden Rule picks it up and is one of the first groups that really spreads it. And at that point, it was known as the the nuclear disarmament symbol, it wasn't until the Vietnam War that it really became known as the peace symbol. So I also want to say a little about, because I know that much of the literature of Vets for Peace on this really mostly give credit to the Quakers for doing the organizing. And I think it's fair to say the Quakers were half of the NVA committee of 30 in that organizing group, that there were also a lot of folks who were not Quakers, who either identified, A.J. Musty being one, a Protestant minister, Ralph DeGia, Jim Peck, a lot of other folks. And so I think it's important to kind of understand that whole story of kind of the variety of folks who were involved. It's interesting, in my reading, I noted, I think Bigelow talks about this a lot, but Jim Peck talks about this in his book, Upper Dogs versus Underdogs, that it was, what's his name, Bill Huntington, who was the second in command who worked with Bigelow on the boat, was a Quaker, and he had a rule that he only wanted Quakers on the crew. And at one point in time, that was changed because there was some real problems in making some decisions to get the boat going in its second tour out. And Bide Rustin stepped in and asked if they could bring Jim Peck onto the crew, and Huntington left to start another crew. But I think that there clearly was some tensions around this at times, although I think the group, for the most part, really worked together. So Bigelow gets a lot of credit in here. This is, again, the book on the peace symbol, in terms of kind of taking it from Bide Rustin and sharing it. This image is from the Power of the People, which again saw this as one of the kind of key early ban the bomb nonviolent actions that was taking place. So on the first attempt to get to the test zone, they were arrested, right? They made it from California out to Honolulu. And then their first attempt to the test zone, they were arrested, brought back to Honolulu, where they refused bail. And I think this is another strategic thing for us to remember, is that your power is often in staying in jail, right? We know from the civil rights movement, jail no bail, time no fine, right? And so this is really before, that in many ways, because that didn't really come until 1960, 61 in the civil rights movement, that they stayed in jail, and that kind of presence, and then the organizing that was going on by the NVA folks around the country was really important in kind of looking at what was happening. So this picture of Bigelow is through the window of the courthouse as he's being tried for this. And it was here after this that discussions dragged on, and that Jim Peck kind of came on the crew, and Huntington left, and then they again went out, as we know, for another time, and again were arrested. And so for the oops, oh god, now I missed that one. I don't know how to go back on this. As we know, Bigelow did a lot of, for a number of people who have read the book, Bigelow did a lot of drawings there. So there's maybe 5 or 6 drawings in the book of people, of the jailers, the people in jail, George Willoughby and Jim Peck in jail. So I think, we know that when people are in jail and they are artists, they often do a lot of drawing as part of both telling their story and a way of spending that time. And he clearly did that and shared these great drawings. Hopefully people are also aware of the story of the Phoenix. And it's really amazing to think that the Phoenix, both the Phoenix of Hiroshima that came over from Hiroshima after Earl Reynolds, who was an expert on radiation, had been in Hiroshima, that one of the crew, Nick McCamey, was from Hiroshima, that Barbara Reynolds and Barbara and Earl's kids were on the boat, that they just happen to dock near each other. Some things are just meant to be. And it was in those discussions that they had that the crew of the Phoenix decided that they too would attempt to go into the test zone. So this map here that Bigelow did shows the boat going over to Honolulu and then several of them attempting to go into the test zone. It's interesting that they also have up in the top left corner, the bomb testing area that the Soviets used way up in Siberia that they did not do. That they didn't use the islands, but used the northern end of the Soviet Union. So it was, oops, sorry. So the Phoenix then going out, the Phoenix being intercepted, that crew, particularly Earl Reynolds, being tried. I thought the interesting thing, and some of I'm thankful for being invited to speak, as I did some research and found things that I had not realized, that Reynolds actually, while being found guilty, then was able to win on appeal. Because what he was really doing was kind of basing it on an educational kind of a defense. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way that again, another strategy is how do we, when we're in these situations, how do we mount our defense? I think one of the other important things is the way that those who were involved directly on the cruise and in some of the organizations. Here you have a former Secretary of SANE, also Jim Peck, going out and doing a lot of speaking. And here we have at Livermore, near the Livermore lab, I assume, to folks who were probably undoubtedly working directly on the development of the weapon systems. So I think that, again, you see, and I saw the kind of continued education work. In other words, here we have a situation where they felt that because the government had come in, and originally they felt like they were not in any way breaking any laws, right? And it was right before they made the first trip that the Atomic Energy Commission actually came up with a new regulation that no US citizens could sail into a testing area. So that it kind of became an executive order. And so, as Bigelow put it, we know we won by that point. And I think that that's another piece of kind of understanding nonviolent strategy, is that it isn't always like, oh, we stopped the atmospheric testing at that moment, right? But it is this kind of an action raises an awareness, raises a consciousness, raises people, encourages people who are not going to go out on the boat, who are not going to risk 60 days in jail, but who are going to be able to find other ways of getting involved and beginning to kind of build that kind of grassroots pressure that that eventually really did lead to a victory, right? So in talking about this, and talking about the Golden Rule to the WRL History Committee, I was reminded that the 1959 peace calendar, which is a skinny little peace calendar that War Resisters League did, it was, I think, only our second or third one, was dedicated to the crews of both the Golden Rule and the Phoenix. And so here you see that they tell the story a little bit, and that they have here the 5 members of the Golden Rule, 5 members of the crew who made it at least from Hawaii on, and then the 5 members of the Phoenix crew. And again, Liberation Magazine and other publications continue to focus on this action, support the activists themselves, and continue to work on these issues. It's the couple more things about these organizations, and then I just want to kind of stop talking and have some more kind of discussion from folks. So later, after I said the Committee for Nonviolent Action took on that name in 1958, and then they continued to do fairly high profile actions, but actions after that, mostly on land, although they did sponsor the Everyman sailings that Scott Herrick did. But in 1959, they did a summer action at the Omaha SAC base, at which point a number of people were arrested at the end of that summer. And then in 1960, they came here being 20 minutes from where I am right now in southeastern Connecticut. They came to New London and Groton, Connecticut, to oppose the building of the Polaris submarine, which was the first intercontinental submarine to carry intercontinental ballistic missiles as part of the nuclear triad. And so they came here for that particular summer. At the end of that summer, they decided two pretty significant things. One was that Brad Little and a number of other folks had been listening to what the workers at Electric Boat said. And one of the things they kept hearing was, go tell it to the Russians. They thought, well, we should go tell it to the Russians. And so they decided to do a walk from San Francisco to Moscow that they began to organize in December of 1960 and went into 1961. And they actually made it to Red Square. So as we saw that Norman, as I mentioned earlier, Norman Cousins was kind of one of these unofficial ambassadors. A.J. Musty also could play that role and managed to kind of help them get into places one would think peace activists might not be able to without getting into kind of playing one side off after another. So the other thing I want to mention was that in 1963, CNVA, the Committee for Nonviolent Action, also organized the Quebec to Guantanamo Walk. And I want to mention that because I know you're all going to Cuba now. And what was interesting about that story is they never got to Cuba because they could not, every time they took off from Key West, from the Florida Keys, they got stopped. So that was another action where they walked from Quebec to the southern tip of Florida, but were not able to get to Guantanamo, to the base there. If people know anything about that walk, it might be that they stopped in Albany, Georgia, and the Albany movement, the civil rights movement, was kind of in high gear there. And they were stopped and they were held because they were walking as an integrated walk, because there were Black people and white people walking together through downtown. And Laurie Pritchett was not going to let that happen. And Barbara Deming went down, was one of the people who went down because Barbara had joined CNVA at Polaris Action in the summer of 1960 and wrote the book called Prison Notes. So there's a lot of these kind of things that just keep happening, and then that brought a whole new grouping of people in who are interested in what was happening, both around civil rights, but also around issues of prisons. So what we know is that out of many of these actions, certainly the Golden Rule being a key piece of it, but many other actions, the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty was signed by the U.S., Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, which banned the atmospheric testing, although we know not the underground testing. SANE later joined together with the Nuclear Freeze campaign that was happening in the 1990s, and then became SANE Freeze. That was its name for a while, and it's now Peace Action. So since 1993, SANE has become Peace Action. And then, as I'd said before, the CNVA became New England Community for Nonviolent Action. That was the other thing that happened after that summer, is that they felt strategically that it made no sense to go into a community, which is interesting. It's different than going into the testing area, right? So that when you go into a community, and you, as they said, rile up the local folks and then leave. It's not the best way to really make the kind of changes that need to be made in a community. And so a number of people, including Marge and Bob Swan, this is Marge giving out a leaflet here, they decided to stay. Within a couple of years, Barbara Deming and her partner, Mary Miggs, had gotten an inheritance when Mary's father died, and they bought the farm in Voluntown in 1962, which is still the Voluntown Peace Trust. And they actually put it in a community land trust, and it was called the Voluntown Peace Trust in 1962, although mostly it was known as CNDA, although now it has the name Voluntown Peace Trust, and has for many decades, and has continued to do this kind of work. And Voluntown Peace Trust is joined with Warrior Sisters League New England and a few other local groups in particularly a couple of years ago, coming together as the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons became, when the weapons became illegal, and have done some actions and events and educational kinds of things since then. And looking to do, somebody called me today and said, time to start organizing for January, because we do a big event with the flags of all of the countries that have signed outside of Electric Boat, the engineering building in New London every year. There's also an interest here in Southeastern Connecticut when the boat comes by Warrior Sisters League, who will be celebrating our 100th anniversary. And here on the left, you see a picture. This is the Thames River. See another boat out there with a peace symbol on it. That they often use boats in the water between Groton and New London. You stand on the pier in New London and you can see right over where they're building the submarines. So the Golden Rule, thanks to your having to change, I know it was a little bit of a problem, but thanks to having to change the dates, the Golden Rule is going to be in New London the day, June 10th, the day of the Harvard-Yale Regatta, which is a big deal here in Southeastern Connecticut. And I went back and looked at the booklet that Brad Little put together on the organizing of Polaris Action, and found on their timeline that one of the first things they did was leaflet. That one of the first things they did in the summer of 1960 for Polaris Action was leaflet at the Yale Harvard Regatta around. I've never tried the leaflet around there. I'm not even sure how one does that. But I think it's an interesting opportunity for us to look at what might this mean, having the Golden Rule within eyeshot, probably, if we can get to the pier that day. And of course, Al Bigelow went to Harvard, so it's kind of another piece of this. And there's a local journalist who is also a Harvard man, who has written about Bigelow in the Harvard, I don't know what, maybe the Harvard Alumni Magazine and the like. So anyway.
Joanne seems to have frozen.
Well, at least it was toward the end.
Yes, I'm not sure how to get her thing off screen. I might be able to stop it.
Maybe she's got to log in again. With that, I was gonna probably let her take a break, but I was gonna ask Helen or Jerry if they had any comment before we continued, unless Joanne is back.
No, she just fell off the call, so.
Helen, can you comment on any of that, or even Daz might have a comment on what Joanne had to say?
I think that history is very amazing, and a lot of it's not covered in the one book I've actually taken the time to read, which is Bigelow's book, Voyage of the Golden Rule. So it's really nice to hear about what all went on in summary format, so that I could kind of wrap my head around the importance of the Northeast and other organizations that were part of CNVA and sort of the evolution of some of this. And I am totally amazed to see so many participants on this call. And I think it's a really great start to learn about what was going on before and after the first voyage of the Golden Rule. I would remark that David Gale, who was the crew member on the first attempt out of Los Angeles, died about 3 or 4 years ago. And his niece Porter contacted us and said she didn't know anything about the Golden Rule until her uncle died. Well, this Gale family came to our event in Dubuque, Iowa recently, and it was really nice to get together with them and see some of the things that they've been keeping to honor their father and grandfathers. So know that they are very much interested in staying involved with the Golden Rule project, as are some other descendants of the original crew.
Just a quick note on that book. You cannot get the Journey of the Golden Rule in Connecticut right now because I tried. And it was funny because the only way I got it was the fella at the New Haven Public Library found it in the basement after he repaired the conveyor belt to bring it to the front again. So I have the only copy. I just want to mention that Richard Duffy, who's probably responsible for half of the people here, has planned, he wants to go to libraries now as part of this project. I don't know if they can do with a fundraiser there, but we want to donate this book to each of the libraries in the cities where these people are, where Helen and Jerry are going to dock that boat. So that would be one project we're thinking about. And I think the group here, these are not the only people involved. You have to go out and get 10 or 20 people, because what we want you to do is to get your passion for nonviolence and peace and bring it to the place where the Golden Rule is going to be docking next spring, plus or minus a few days. I even reached out to our Cuban activists in Connecticut, because I think just the fact it's going to Cuba might motivate them a little bit, but I haven't seen that. So Richard Duffy, shout out to Richard Duffy, please. And you just need to connect with others. Ellen, did Joanne show
Joanne
up?
is back. Look on
Okay,
your screen.
so
She's right there.
maybe after she
Muted.
wraps up a few questions, we have to leave in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
well, luckily I was literally on my last sentence when my Wi-Fi went out. So that was good timing. Anyway, yeah, no, I think hopefully.
Okay, I see a hand from Bob. Maybe we can get a few questions in.
Well, I was going to let Joanne finish, but you're speaking of books. I want to highly recommend a book. I'm only halfway through. If you want to talk about books at different libraries, with the unfortunate title of Blown to Hell, but it's a very, very in-depth look at the effects on the Marshall Islanders of the 67 nuclear devices that were set off in their land. It's in addition to being very factual and very good, it's quite a page turner. It's not dry at all. Just a recommendation.
And the Marshall Islanders in Dubuque, Iowa were among those welcoming the Golden Rule. So
That was very exciting to see. Yeah.
that was very cool. Other questions, because I am being a little pushy because I have a hard stop at 7. So I see Bud.
Yeah, so I just want to bring up some of some more of the backstory. The French Connection, which is what Vietnam was all about. The CIA was protecting the heroin shipments for the Corsican mob after World War II. And I've lately been looking at KBR and Halliburton, and their whole economy, their whole business plan is based on war. which is what we have to stop. And Joanne's always talking about the economic conversion. I think that's what we have to focus on as a pathway forward.
Okay, Anthony. Anthony, you're up.
You're on mute.
Yeah, my photo kept switching around. I couldn't hit the unmute, but thank you. Just a little bit, and thank you very much, Joanne. Fantastic history. One thing that I like to reiterate in the history that often gets left out, which you mentioned, is Norman Cousins, but it is Norman Cousins bringing over the Hiroshima Maidens that really affected Captain Bigelow. He had two of the maidens in his home for a year. And it is this action that said, I have to do something about this. And that's what started him thinking, I got to do something more. And that started the engine thinking about what can I do, and talking to these other great people that you mentioned. So, and Andrea Cousins is one of his daughters. And thank you for mentioning being an ambassador to Khrushchev and the Vatican, et cetera, because Norman Cousins, I recommend his book, The Improbable Triumvirate, Norman Cousins. It gives a great backstory happening to pull that test treaty together. It was really a miracle. And Norman Cousins, more than really any single person I know, got that test treaty together for JFK. God bless. Thank you, and fantastic night.
Okay, Gabriella.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for all that history, Joanne. And it's what a wonderful treat to hear your voice again and see your face. I just never thought I'd see you again. So it's really wild. But anyway, we need, like, at least like at the meeting and in talking to some of the folks, some of the members, and trying to explain to folks what we're trying to do, we need more concrete, sort of tasks. Like, what are the things that actually need to happen? What types of activities can people plug into? So right, I guess the easiest way to say it is we need organizing tasks that we can delegate to people. That's what folks seem to be looking for, discrete, concrete tasks.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
answer Gabby. I think at this point, what we've been doing now for a couple months is just getting these information out to see the number of people that we can get involved. Now, these are not the only people. We have to get you people to go out in your communities and get 10 or 20 other people. So there is work to be done. And probably with the Christmas season coming up, I don't know if we're going to have a Zoom in December, but if there's enough interest, yes, there has to be the nut and bolts. We have to start now with fundraisers and events to do.
Okay, Gerald has his hand up.
Yes, I'm going to follow up with Gabriella's point of looking for concrete tasks. I myself would be involved in two types. One, getting interfaith groups in the area of New London and Groton. They confront what's going on the base and how we do that, and figuring out just organizing it. The other is having towns, some of the small towns or in the larger towns, doing motions on nuclear weapons and how they be phrased and what would be possible, what would not be possible. And then the work that we had at the library in West Hartford is amazing. We can do those even if the vote isn't in down in New London.
I would like to add maybe it's going to be stopping in 4 places in Connecticut and a couple places in New York, of course, but we need to focus on electric boat in Groton. Maybe we could all get together for something there.
Okay, I'm just putting these up in the order that I see people's hands. So Peter Wilton.
Hi, so as a relative newbie, is there a template for what's going to happen at a location where the golden rule shows up? That is, we'll have a
Oh.
press conference with the boat in the background there, and then at the local libraries, there'll be discussions or whatever.
Helen, maybe you could speak to that?
Yes. So yes, we do have suggested actions that can be taken when we get there. Before we get there is the time to work on city council resolutions and proclamations of welcome. And then when we get there is a good idea to have the resolutions and proclamations presented officially with a press conference. And then educational events and tours of the boat and other actions that people decide are appropriate for their location. So I can start working with you on that. The main thing, another thing before we get there though, is to get your sponsors in order. Get all the people gathered together that you think are excited about us coming, and start working on, okay, who would like to have us, who would like to invite us to their organization, who would like to participate by having a bigger event where lots of organizations are coming together. And I'll give you a list of organizations that are good for approaching, and some templates on how you can approach them to start getting people in line for our time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep you on the spotlight, Helen. Ellen Barfield.
Thanks, Ellen Davidson. Just want to tell folks that since we're geographically going to be arrived at by the golden rule before you are, we in Baltimore have been meeting for a while, and we meet again tonight at 7:30. And we're discussing what we're going to do and who's going to reach out and where and what. We haven't nailed much down yet, but it's getting to be time to do that. And that's what you do, is call a meeting, and whoever turns up and whatever they're interested in is what you plan on. There's a million opportunities. You can't do them all. They can't do them all. But we are definitely discussing how we're going to put it all together in Baltimore. And I look forward to hearing what you all put together.
Thank you. Okay, Diane Keefe.
Yeah, I read the e-newsletter, and it would be helpful to send us along, maybe through Jim Brazil, so we'll know where to look. Press releases that have been done in the Midwest, anything that we don't have to create de novo is going to save us time, and we can be more effective. Also, when I was in Milwaukee last month, I saw Ira Helfand give a talk on the effects of nuclear war. And I think it would be great to bring this more into current issues. Because with the war in Ukraine, we really have to be right on just how much of a danger this is in terms of suicide. The way the United States is currently going, and Biden's comments at the fundraiser and the repudiation of that Jayapal letter, all those things are important to be conversant on. And lastly, he was giving a talk before about 300 people in the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. So I think we really need to target the big organizations, even the Chamber of Commerce and the places you don't usually go. We need to go there. I don't think we should just concentrate on getting our friends who already agree with us to spin their wheels together. I think we have to go to bigger groups.
Okay, I see Anthony and Gabriella's hands up, but they already spoke. Are your hands up at new?
Yeah, just to reinforce something. And thank you, Diana. That's correct. Ira has, and the golden rule is supporting his Back to the Brink resolution, which all of us can focus our representatives, senators, and congressmen on that bill. So that's something very concrete we can all do. That and the city councils that Helen mentioned. That's it. Thank you.
Back from the brink, not
Ellen,
to it.
Ellen, I think William Coquel has something to say.
Well, my hand.
Yeah,
was up.
Gabriella had her hand up. Let's get Gabriella first.
Just very briefly, I think it would be really helpful. The folks that are on the golden rule right now said that the folks over in Minnesota and Duluth had done a lot of programs. Maybe one of the next meetings could be some of the other, states and things that have already done some activities to give us some inspiration, to help, sort of churn our wheels a little bit. I think that might help us all better understand what some potential is. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, you said William Coquel had something?
Yes, William, you want to unmute yourself there?
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to say out here on Long Island, right next to where I live, we have a town of Patchogue that they actually are an international city of peace. They just became that. And the town next to it, Sayville, they want to also become an international city of peace. They're working on it, and they were wondering how they could get the Veterans for Peace, who they could plug into that could just give a verbal backup. I am a member of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 138, but the thing is, there's nobody else. Right after the Iraq War ended, everybody just went about their business. And I joined this peace group, South Country Peace Group, which is very large, and North Country Peace Group, also large. And we have, Sayville has at least 18 peace poles. In schools, they have them in libraries, churches. We have one right here, right around the corner in the library in Bellport. We put it a few years ago. They accepted it. And so what I wanted to know is what these folks wanted to know. What can the veterans do just to verbally back them up?
Okay, I just want to say, because I'm sort of running the Zoom, I have not been able to keep the running notes. So if you could also make sure that any things like this, like requests for things, that you put them in the form so that we have that written down. And I'm going to go back over the recording later and try and pull out the relevant notes, but I'm not keeping notes. And it is now 2 minutes of, I would like to have us figure out whether we want to meet on December 26th, which would be the next scheduled fourth Monday. And it's great for me because it's the holiday and I'm not working. I'm going to take you off, Joanne, and I'm going to actually
That's good.
make us back to the gallery here. So does anybody have any objection to meeting on the 26th? Is that, I know it's the day after the holiday, but it's Zoom, we can meet from anywhere. So the fourth Mondays at 5:30 is what we are kind of landing on as a day that works for Jim and me, which is already hard enough to coordinate schedule. So is that all right with everybody? Okay. And I think that maybe we should pull together, Jim and I should figure out, we should pull together smaller groups to start working directly on local actions for the golden rule and working with Helen and her posse.
Yeah, that would be the next step. Yeah, the next step is going to be to coordinate efforts to get funds and money and sponsors for all of this. Yeah.
Okay, so it is now 7 o'clock. This has been really great. Joanne, thank you so much for.
Can Eric say something? It looks like Eric, do you want to say something?
I think he's just trying to say this was good, right?
Oh.
Yay, this was very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Eric.
Hey there, Joanne. Excellent, most excellent, Joanne. Thank you.
So, and I will have this recording up on the cloud in a couple of days up on YouTube. So we'll send that link out to people if they want to share this presentation.
Great. And I just note in the notes, particularly in response to Gabriella, but everybody else, that the anniversary of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is in January. That's a really good time to focus if we're talking about kind of educating people around it, doing actions, getting out in the streets, et cetera. So we've been doing that in New London for years, and I'm sure we'll do it again. So.
Joanne, how can we get added to the Connecticut WRL e-list?
How quick can you do that?
No, how can
could
you?
we?
Oh, how could you? Well, we haven't, the Voluntown Peace Trust has really been our main vehicle for getting word around, but yeah,
What's
just
the link?
Voluntown Peace Trust, or you could just write to Voluntown Peace Trust at Gmail. Or you could write to Joanne@warresisters.org.
Eric, it's on that. You can just click on it.
And don't forget the Facebook page.
And we have a Facebook page that we get everything out on too. Yeah. Voluntown Peace Trust Facebook page.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we had a great meeting. Thanks, Joanne, Ellen, of
Thank you.
course, Helen, Jerry, and all our friends in Connecticut. Thank you very much. And New York and Baltimore.
And Baltimore.
From Baltimore.
I got it out there before
Ellen,
you
the
did.
bilocator.
All right, thank you.
That's why
everybody.
there's two of us, so we can be two places at once.
That's right. The two
Well,
Ellens.
thanks so much to all of you. And the evening of the 26th is going to be interesting. The boat will have left Tampa, St. Petersburg for Key West on its way to Cuba that day. So that'll be an
Oh,
interesting day for me.
All right. Okay, thank you, everybody. And
Thank you, Ellen.
we will see you all in a month.
Thank you. Good night.
Great.
Good
Thanks.
night.